Swagwekoscano, Dawa Chastani Engadeas, Nange Gayados hat, Phyllis Bardot wa Eadonio. Got no oni and gas hawe, Iwi and Guawi ne, Aganoto ne, Nange Oiwagat ne, Gano neote, Guat he Jangua and Wajak Conyo ne, Oiwatge, Haigua and Wadeas, Heostons hot, Agajangua, Sigua and Swadese. Sigua Gayatge has he. Downa, Dangwa notes hago. I'm thankful everybody's content and well-being enough to be tuning in right now. I am Dawa Chestnut. I said before I start, I wanted to tell you all that I know that this information seems a lot and difficult, but if we break it up and read a little bit at a time, then I hope that it becomes more useful and more helpful for you. And then I just ended saying that I was going to translate. So there was that. This is my first attempt to break apart a book. We are going to start with Fundamentals of Seneca Gayaso, again mentioned, written by Phyllis Bardot. She's got a very informational and important introduction, kind of displaying like why we're at where we're at within the Seneca language efforts to revitalize and keep it alive. So this is Phyllis's point of view from my point of view. I just want to note that if this is something that interests you, there are more references where you can get into. If not, that's okay. I'm going to do my best. En go. En yes. So let's get to it. We have to take this back and get an understanding that missionaries and linguists coming to this country many hundreds of years ago felt compelled to learn and write our native languages for their own advantage. They lacked a lot of the sounds and grammar rules, and they couldn't develop a solid grammar system to figure out our language, and they wanted to convert their Bible to Seneca, so they would have willing native persons help them translate into our version. Linguists still aggressively research native languages for no known practical reasons as in the past, other than to address a personal challenge to be the first breakthrough a scholastic area of linguistic mystery. Native first language speakers, the ones that grew up with their language, have long recognized the detrimental effects of the invasion of our culture through language. The key to culture is language. Our culture is based upon the philosophy of our creator. Every culture on earth is based upon the philosophy of its own creator. Among the people who came to our land were escapees of religious tyranny. They brought their language and their religion. However, Christian philosophy dictates that they must proselytize at every corner of the earth, meaning convert to promote, which meant that our belief system must be replaced with theirs if they were to be good Christians. So this basically says like it was the missionaries' mission to go and save the natives and promote the message of the Bible for them to be good people. Side note, I can't really reference who said it, but I know it was definitely said. Missionaries and linguists used to bribe our people with booze in order for them to help them be translators. That's why a lot of it is not credible, because the natives just saw the opportunity to get the free booze. So a lot of it seems like it's BS, just to get them out of their way and get what they wanted, seeing that alcohol was a huge problem, still is for so long. So that's a side note. In order for anybody to get their thoughts and points across, they had to learn each other's languages. So the missionaries and linguists were learning native languages, and the natives were starting to learn English. And then they began to understand the good message of the Bible as being similar to the good instructions of our own Creator, and some willingly applied the appropriate language for the Bible. It is safe to say that those involved in the translation saw their role as helpers only. The Jesuit missionaries were the first to proselytize the native people along the eastern seaboard. They seen that these severe challenges required severe solutions. And the historians that documented this time and other writings and oral accounts by the victims and those that suffered by our people to relinquish, meaning quit our old ways to adopt the new belief system. It would be reasonable to conclude that the adults who bore the brunt of these horrible incentives would strongly encourage their children to Christianize. So we can only imagine the awful things that would be done in order for the missionaries to get their way for us to stop being Ngwetnwe. A formula which worked may have said to have been practiced in the systematic eradication effort upon native languages, meaning we do things their way in their setting. In this instance, it was the children who suffered at missionary boarding schools who in turn became adults, and out of love, they discouraged their own children in learning the language of their birthright. It was just easier just to abide by Christianity and other colonizing rules. We are past those generations, but we are most definitely still affected. The consequences have continued to escalate as the cultural balance becomes more socially and linguistically one-sided to the point where our Seneca language has declined. Children are no longer learning as a first language. 50 years ago, the population of first language speakers was still numerous, but there were signs that there was a decline in usage among the young, as all children were required by law to attend school, to practice their ways, their system, their beliefs. It was approximately another 10 years before the concern of possibility of language loss may become a reality. Elders did their part. Other elders seen this as a fulfillment of prophecy. There's first language speakers who began action to reverse this. She mentions how Alberta Austin began to take a close look at how the language is spoken and made notations, while she, Phyllis, began to analyze the words and its parts and made notations. Phyllis from Allegheny and Alberta from Cattaraugus both worked independently of each other, doing their own areas of expertise. Their writings reflected an identical vowel system. Eventually, the Seneca Nation strengthened the effort by including Seneca language programs within the educational departments in Allegheny and Cattaraugus territories. This allowed for hiring of new language teachers, and then the pioneering of Seneca language teachers became curriculum developers, material developers, and grade component evaluators. There was more efforts from 1968 to 1988, all the way from 1990 to present, where we now have the younger teachers that we are probably familiar with now. The nation has passed resolutions in support of all the efforts between all this time, and funding through Title IV, ANA grants, specifically named projects. If you want to get into any of these, The Way It Was, Wild Medicinal Plants, and the 1,000 Hours of Elder Tapes. Many resource books have been written within this time. In 1994, the Seneca language staff wrote the self-published Seneca Language Reference Book. She said it's a source of pride for her, and after several years of field testing and revisions, she finally made her self-published book, this one, The Fundamentals of Seneca. And this is all her studies and her work, all showcased into what we will be getting into. The Fundamentals of Seneca is designed to walk the student in a comprehensive manner through the basics. This important step is imperative in becoming familiar with the vowel sounds of spoken Seneca. An instructional word, sedanthios, means make a good ear, an expression which says it's important to listen. To listen well is to speak correctly. Once the vowels become second nature for the learner, independent study is possible at times when elders and teachers are not available. A thorough command of the vowels will enable the learner to transcribe Seneca words accurately and to read Seneca correctly. We are now at a time where systematic teaching is necessary to compete with the systematic teaching of English. The number of fluent elders who pass away each year and the median age of elders remaining have concluded and predicted that the window of opportunity for learning our native languages is approximately 15 years. Minus 10. It can be argued that language has evolved and changed since European contact. It can be said that language expanded by the invention of words to describe important items. It can also be argued that the language evolves and changes naturally through usage and time. It can be said that it's true, and using English language as an example, a language which has evolved from archaic to modern has been long stabilized through aggressive and systematic teaching. Likewise, Seneca language has changed naturally through the usage in time. There was the earliest language, which is no longer known except from The past 20 years has seen a shift in natural speech patterns as Seneca as second language speakers are challenged with the monumental task of learning and teaching. Seneca language teachers today share a heavy responsibility. They are now the first-line defenders against continued language loss. As foreboding as the window of opportunity could sound, it must be taken as positive and as a period of time to seriously and aggressively redirect the mentality and approaches towards stabilizing the state of Seneca language today. Language, as we know, can no longer be taken for granted. It is to survive the onslaughts of daily distractions. It must not be politicized linguistically and be stalled over the merits. It can be recognized only that a handful of elders are actually available to now actively support the young teachers' pronunciation and intonation efforts. Elders are often referred to as treasures, the holders of great knowledge. It goes without saying they deserve to be shown ultimate respect. It is clear that the time is of the essence. The luxury of intellectualizing about reviving oral Seneca communication methods through living and doing of long ago is not only impractical, but impossible given today's lifestyles. The concern over geographic language differences among Seneca territories should no longer be a part of the equation at the language discussion table, as each sector in these geographic areas is well aware of minute differences and chooses to focus on the greater picture, that of language continuance. It is so important for all concerned to stay focused on the greater picture and our vision to not be so obscured by magnifying details which serve only to hinder and discourage. A case in point is the spelling of Seneca vocabulary. Phyllis goes on to listing two-pronged issues when learning and studying Seneca language. The first being a minor is spelling discrepancies between references. It's not that writers or learners are incompetent, but it's just the way that they're able to reflect what they hear and understand. There's not an exact perfect book out there, but in a way, she says, don't get stuck on typos because that can be discouraging, but at the same time, be familiar with all of the sounds and vowels and their operations so that you're able to reflect the best you're able to. It's never going to be perfect in somebody else's understanding, but that's your best ability to reflect that. The second prong of the spelling issue is a major issue. The planned eradication of native languages movement by outside influences begun many hundreds of years ago, and it still continues to haunt us in subtle ways. Outside influences quietly move about to chip away at what we have taken 40 years to develop. So we created ways for ourselves to understand our own arrangement of spelling and writing. This was what orthography would be considered. Many hundreds of Seneca language students at local schools have been introduced to the system and are able to read Seneca. Unfortunately, these movements keep trying to change them to make it more simple for linguists to understand. People at Seneca Language Defense say that it doesn't need to change because the English alphabet that we use to learn is what our children are already accustomed to. It's what they already learned. So instead of adding new rules, this and that, we're going to stick to what our past language influencers have already done for us. The seeds of dissension have been planted. This is just a total obvious disagreement between things. We must stay focused. Our Seneca language is on life support. Are we to allow the language of our birthright to become a statistic as one of the many original native languages now extinct? Our window of opportunity is short and should not allow precious time for any type of distracting tactics. Seneca language is priority. Our traditional language is our identity as Ongwetnwe. Without it, we would merely be English-speaking Native Americans of Seneca descent in this country. And see. So there is a very condensed version of Phyllis's introduction of her book, Fundamentals of Seneca. I hope this is a really good informational piece for you to reflect on. I kind of want to get back into just realizing that a lot of things weren't our fault and it's out of our control, but it is still our responsibility to take it back, to own it back, anything we need to do. So there's something to think about. Agajangwa and Swadestant.